Today, we are continuing on our series of Family Reboot. And so far, what we've done is we have addressed basically the three major aspects of the family roles that there are. We have talked about the role of a wife in a biblical household. We've talked about the role of a husband in a biblical household. In the last 3 weeks, we've touched on different aspects of being a parent. So Jordan talked about the environment they're growing up in. I talked about a biblical role of a parent. And last week, we talked about the talk and how to communicate that to your kids, okay? Today, we start kind of a different part of this series for the last 3 weeks. And today, we're going to be looking at this. It's unity within your family. And the thing about unity is this. Unity is one of the most powerful things on this earth. For example, I've just got some things to show you the power of unity. If you put that first picture up, I don't know if you can really tell what that is, but what this is, it's a YouTube video. You can go see it if you want. I could only get a picture because I couldn't play the video for you, but that is a dead gecko being carried by a bunch of ants up an 8-foot wall. And they actually work together, and you can see them carrying this thing inch by inch up a wall, and they carry a dead gecko, which is probably, 200 times the size of one of those ants, up the side of a wall, working together in unity. They're able to pull that thing up over a wall, okay? That is amazing when things unify what they can accomplish together. Another example we have is we know dictators around the world. One of the things they do to keep their power is this. They have to keep the people ununified. They have to make sure the people are spread into different little groups so they can never unify. Because when they unify, what happens is they're out of power. And recently, in the last probably 2.5 years, we've seen in Libya, we've seen in Egypt, we've seen dictators thrown out of their seats of power. Why? Because enough people eventually unified, and they knew there's nothing we can do, even with the military, to stop this. When we unify, we are extremely powerful. Another example, and I have to throw some sports in there somewhere. The 1980 Olympic hockey team. If you guys remember them, 1980, they win the gold medal. And in the game before the gold medal, they play the Russians. How many of you were alive and remember this? I don't remember. I was too young. I was only 5, but okay, a lot of you remember this. 1980, they go up against the Russians. This Russian team, our guys are a bunch of college kids, okay? The Russian team are a bunch of professional ice hockey players. And what they had at this point going into this game, they had won 27 straight international matches. No one had been within 2 goals of them. The game before this, I think they won 9-1 against Sweden or something. They were an incredible team. The year previous to this, the same hockey team, they played the NHL hockey all-star team, and they beat them 6-0. The Russians did. They beat our all-star team 6-0, our professionals. Our college kids go in there, and they beat them. And the world is just shocked, and it's called The Miracle on Ice. And when you go through and you watch that movie and you learn about it, what you find out is these guys were unified around their coach and what he said they did and what he said they believed, and they were completely unified, and through that unity, they pulled off a miracle. They pulled off something nobody could have ever dreamed could have happened, but they pulled it off because of unity. Well, here's the deal. As Christian families, we are called to be unified. Okay, Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians, and he's talking to the church, but understand the church is God's family. Okay, so this can apply to our individual Christian families as well, I believe. He says this in chapter 1. He says, I appeal to you, dear brothers and sisters, by the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, to live in harmony with each other. Let there be no divisions in the church. Rather be of one mind, united in thought and in purpose. As Christians and as a Christian home, we're to be unified around God. That's where we are to find our unity. Now, here's our problem. We get our target wrong a lot of times. We get what we're supposed to be unified on wrong. Sometimes we unify around our kids' success, and that becomes our target, is making sure our kids are successful in whatever it is, whether it's sports or economically or in school or whatever it is. And our unifying thing in our family is making sure our child is successful, and that's wrong. You're not to be unified around that. Sometimes in our families we make it about finding comfort. That we make everything in life, everything about our families, the things we're unified about is making our lives comfortable at home, and that we have comfort at home. And if we can achieve that, we feel like we've pulled it off. and we're unified just finding comfort at home. But again, that's wrong. That is the wrong target. Sometimes we make it about material things or material success. And we rally as a family, find unity in purchasing stuff and getting stuff, and having people look at us with envy and go, look what I have. And that becomes our unity thing that unifies us as a family. And I want you to know, for Christians, that is wrong. That is not what we're to be unified around. Sometimes we make it about emotional success. We make our lives and our entire focus of our families is how can we be happy? How can we just be happy? And again, I want you to know as Christians, that's wrong. That is not what you are to be focused on. That is not to be the thing you are unified as a family on. Joshua, I believe, gets it right in the Old Testament. If you don't know who Joshua is one of God's leaders in the Old Testament. All of you know who Moses is. You've heard that name. He's the guy that takes over for Moses. Okay? So Moses dies, Joshua comes on the scene, and God has appointed him as his new leader. And Joshua's at a point with these people of Israel. He leads them into this promised land. He's at a point with them, and these people have hardly ever been able to be unified. And he gives them a speech, and he basically lays a speech down, and he goes, if you follow God, here's what he tells us we're going to get. If we don't follow God, he tells us this is what's going to happen. And he basically gives this big, long speech to him, and at the end of the speech, Joshua gets it right, and he says this. He says, but if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates? Or will it be the gods of the Amorites on whose land you now live? But for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Joshua gets what we're to be unified on right. He gets it clear, which is this: me and my family, we will unify around the work of the Lord. That's what we're going to do. As Christian families, that needs to be your unifying thing, is the work of the Lord, that we work together as a family to accomplish kingdom work for God. That needs to be your unifying thing, nothing else. Okay? Now, here's a problem with that. It's very easy to declare who the target of your unity is. Okay? It's very easy for all of us in here today to have a speech and go, yeah, my family's for serving the Lord. That's easy. The real test is this: how do you do it? And how do you keep that commitment strong in your family? How do you keep that focus? How do you keep that unity on Christ, on the work of God in your family? That's a tough part. Speech is all speech. But doing the work and actually making it work, that's the tough part. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. How do you do it? How do you do that with your families? Moses, the guy before Joshua, I think gives us a really good example of how we do it. Moses' situation is this. He is given the law by God. God comes into the Israelite people. He gives them, here's all my rules, here's all my regulations, here's all the things I want you to do. And Moses gives it to all the people. And then at the end of it, he says this to them. He says, and you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. And this would be the next part, a reference to parents with your households. He says to do this: repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road and when you're going to bed and when you get up. Tie them on your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Basically, what Moses is saying is this: don't just make God this little text over here in these rules. Make him a part of your family. You need to be unified around him. He needs to be an active part of your family. God cannot be just a guy your family goes and visits on Sunday at the church. God has to be an active participant in your family. And I just want to ask you this. If you really look at your family right now, if God wasn't mentioned for a week, would anyone notice? If God wasn't mentioned in your household for a week, would anyone in your house go, that was strange? Or would it just pass by? If it would just pass by, I would tell you this: you're not unified around God as a family. You're not unified there. God is not an active participant in your home. Because I can tell you this: if your mom isn't home for a week, do you notice? Yeah, no. If your mom's not home, do you notice? If dad's away on a job for a week, do you notice? Yeah, something's missing. Should be the same way with God. If God is not around for a week in your house because you don't mention him and talk about him, you should notice something. You should be going, something's just not right. Moses says some of these things in there. He says this. He says, talk about them, repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you get up out of bed, and when you're going to bed and when you are getting up. Tie them on your hands, wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on your doorposts of your house and your gates. Basically, he's saying it's find ways to talk about God regularly in your home, and that's what I want to encourage you to do today. If you're going to unify around God as a family, he has to be talked about. You've got to find ways to have dialogue as a family regularly about God. That would be some simple things. Pray before your meals together. Don't do a memorized prayer, okay? Pray as if you're talking to a real human being, a real person, not just some program robot that you're supposed to spit out a regular prayer to, okay? Pray. Pray with your kids at night. Talk about God with your kids. Open dialogue up with your children and talk about God. If you don't have kids, there's a lot of you in here that are grandparents. Your kids have grown up. You still, as a couple, need to be dialoguing about God on a regular basis at home. You need to be talking about how God can use you to do God's work on this earth, and you need to be having that conversation not just here, at home. That's where it needs to be happening. God needs to be mentioned so much in your house that if he was missing for a week, you would go, whoa, that's weird. Okay? I can guarantee you this, in my house right now, if we didn't mention God for a week, my son would be like, what happened to mom and dad? What happened to our house? Something's missing. Why? Because we talk about God all the time. We pray to him. We have conversations with him. We answer questions about him. We are talking about him regularly. Let me tell you another thing this includes. As a family, you need to be asking and talking about each other, how does God want to use us to impact the world around us? If you want to start, what is my starter step of talking about God and my family to unify us? Start talking about how do we as a family serve God? How do we as a family, how do we put ourselves in a position to be used by him? What does he want from us as a family? Not just individuals, as a family. Let me tell you a cool story this week. Thursday it was. I pick up Gideon because it's my day off. So Thursday I go and pick Gideon up at school, and every day I ask him, like how it went, and he tells me if he got in trouble or if it was a good day or a bad day or whatever, and I ask him how recess went and all that. This Thursday, different day, I pick him up, and I'm like, how'd school go? And he goes, awesome. And I'm like, okay, this is odd. My kid never is excited about school, like it was a great day or anything, but you can tell he's just kind of bubbly and okay, that's not my normal Gideon, okay? So I'm like, why are you so happy today? He's like, it was a great day, Dad. I'm like, why? He's like, I got to share my faith for the first time. I'm like, okay, tell me about it. How'd that work out? And he's like, well, our whole class got in trouble, so we all had to walk laps during recess. So we were all having to walk the laps on the recess, and he's like, a couple of my friends were complaining. One's my friend and another one's from the other class, and they were complaining because we unfairly got in trouble or whatever. And he said, so I took that as a way to talk about God, how God took unfair punishment for us, and we need to stop whining because God got unfairly punished for us, and he took a lot more than we did. And he said, so this other kid started asking me, well, what do you mean Jesus? Who's Jesus or whatever? And he's like, so I told him about Jesus, Dad. And he's like, I told him who Jesus was and how he took our sins and how he took our place and how we have freedom through him and all that stuff. And he's like, and I told him that, and then we separated, and then when we had to stop walking and have recess, he came back over to me and said, can you tell me more? What else is there about him or whatever? And Gideon's like, so I got to tell him about Jesus all afternoon. So I just reached my hand back. I'm like, good job, boy. And he's like, click, and we did a high five, okay? And then we had a conversation after, and I said, good job, guys. I said, that's the first time you got to do that. And I said, we'll talk more, and we'll figure out how to be more effective at it. We'll talk about how you can become more articulate. And he's like, what's articulate? And I'm like, here's what articulate is. And I'm like, we'll figure this stuff out. And I said, you'll get better and better every time you do this. And I said, sometimes it won't be that easy. Sometimes people aren't going to like you for it, but the better you get at it, the more comfortable you'll be. And I said, good job. And he's like, yeah, Dad, it was sweet. And I was like, yeah, that was great. And the reason for that is this. As a family, we're unified around that. It was the most excited I've seen that kid, I think, probably ever at school. Why? It's what we talk about all the time at home. It's what we know our family's goal is our family is to impact other people with Jesus Christ. And because of that, it brings unity. It puts all the other things to the side. I could have asked him, Gid, were you the one that got the class in trouble? Like happens sometimes. But that day didn't really matter to me. He got to share Christ. That's cool. That works. Okay? That is what happens when you find unity in your family, is God can start to do incredible things with your family. Now, the other question is this. Why is it so important? Because I'm telling you this, it is extremely, extremely important your family is unified around Christ, that your family is unified around the work of God. And let me tell you why. 40 years ago wasn't as important. 40 years ago, the people of this world could have lived here and found out about Jesus and found it out through 50 different avenues and had decent, stable homes and stuff like that, and they would have been all right. Today, it's not so. Today, you guys know the culture. Jordan shared it with us. Last week, I talked about it a little. You all see it happening around us. And I'll tell you on Wednesday nights when we discuss my sermon, we go in my classroom, and on Wednesday nights we have the adults in there, and we do further discussion on that week's topic. The last few weeks are depressing because you start to hear the stories of what's going on in the world. Last Wednesday night, we had 3 kids come over, and it starts to depress you. We had 3 kids walk over here from the neighborhood across the street. One was second, third grader at tops. I think it's the oldest. The next one's a pre-K, so like a 4-year-old, and then like a 2 or 3-year-old with no shoes. And they walked over here. They were here the previous Wednesday. They were at church last Sunday, walked over, and they got here like 3 o'clock. And I was like, hey, kids, what you doing? How'd you get here? And they're like, we walked. And I'm like, we don't start anything until like 6. And they're like, well, as soon as we got home from school, I don't know if it's parents or uncles or whoever the adults are at the house said, hey, we're going out. You guys just go over to the church. We'll meet you back here tonight. And 3 o'clock, these 3 kids come running over here. They cross Garnett in the heat of the afternoon. One of them barefoot, 2-year-old. She can't keep control of them in here, let alone crossing the street. And they walk over. And you see stuff like that every day. And it starts to get overwhelming, doesn't it? Doesn't it? You get overwhelmed. You sit there as Christians and you go, what are we supposed to do? How do you combat that? What do you do there? This is why it's so important. You unify your family around the work of Christ. It is this. Here's how you handle it. You do the micro things in life. You focus on the micro, and what I mean by that is the life-to-life discipleship that you can do. The people you have contact with as a family, you work at presenting Christ to them and being that hope in their lives. That is your role. That is what your family's purpose is the people in your life-to-life you impact, okay? You've got to get your brain off of what I call the macro, which is the big picture. You've got to get your mind off what's happening in society as a whole. You have to get your mind off what's happening as the world, and you focus on what you can control, which is the impact you can have on the people around you. And through that, guys, we can actually make an impact in this world. I say this on Wednesday nights, I've said in here, we are the last line of defense for this world at this point. We are drifting quickly to complete immorality, to complete there are no rights and wrongs at all. And the last hope of defense in this culture today is us as Christians. And it's not going to happen because we sit inside this church and we listen to each other. It's going to happen because the other 6 days of the week, we are unified around the work of Christ, and we are doing our work as a family trying to impact the people we have contact with. That is our role. That's why it's so important. Paul writes this in Philippians. He says this. He says, live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. It wasn't any different back then. And just as bad, if not worse. And Paul says, here's your job. Live clean, innocent lives and be a shining light to a dark world. Your family needs to be unified. Your family needs to be a bright, shining light for this world to see. That they go, that's something different. And that's some hope that I can't find anywhere else. That is the role of your family. I want you to know this morning, my family will be unified, serving Christ and impacting the people in our lives. Will your family do the same? Ours will. We need you on board with us. If you want to have a unified family, if you want to have a family that makes eternal impact on the people in your lives, what you need to do is this: put Christ at the center of it, and everybody focus on it, be unified on it, and go, God, use us to impact this world. It's the only way we will save it. Would you pray with me?